Honorable dignitaries, esteemed colleagues, respected academics, innovators, entrepreneurs, students, and distinguished guests in person and online. Good morning and welcome to UNISA's second in-person segment of the Innovation Leadership Series, brought to you by the Directorate of Innovation at the DITC, and it is an absolute honor to stand here and welcome you on behalf of UNISA. A round of applause, please. Just to break the ice for myself. That was quite selfish of me, I know. I would like to give a special welcome to our distinguished guests amongst us, Professor Tenjiwe Meiwa, Vice Principal of Research, Postgraduate Studies, Innovation and Commercialization, Mr. Tsitejo Moses Sesayecho, Executive Director, ICT Portfolio, Department of ICT Governance, Risk and Compliance, Mr. Ayanda Noma, Director of the DITC, and our special guest, Dr. Mclean Sibanda. A round of applause again. Thank you very much. And before we start, without any further ado, I would like to go through a couple of house rules. Firstly, and most importantly, and quite obviously, even though we don't follow it, please keep your phone on silent. It does tend to disrupt proceedings, and being online and being live on the recording, we don't want that to happen. So please keep your phone on silent. Secondly, the toilets are outside the door that you used to come in. You walk straight. Right before you meet the cafeteria, on your right, there's male and female toilets there. Thirdly, you'll see as you're walking in at the registration table, there's books there. Dr. Sibanda's books. They're on sale today. So please, before or after or even during the proceedings, feel free to speak to Homozo, who's at the table, to assist you to purchase the books. And lastly, we will have a special Q&A segment at the end of Dr. Sibanda's talk. So please reserve your questions for that. They will be open to our online audience and our in-person audience. And I would like to call up the person who's going to be doing our welcoming, Mr. Tisetso Moses Segaecho. A round of applause for him, please. Did I pronounce it incorrectly? I am so sorry. Please correct me.
It's Tsitejo. Yes. Thanks, Matsejo. Right. Good morning, colleagues, both physical and online. As introduced, my name is Tsitejo Moses Segaecho. I'm the Executive Director in ICT, the center that is partnering with DITC, the Academy for Applied Technology Innovation, reports into my department. And unfortunately, Dr. Twabu, who's heading the department, is not here today, but she's doing other work outside of the country. But I'm glad to be here on behalf of the VP ICT, who's the CIO in UNISA, to also convey the welcome message. She's also outside of the country, attending other conferences in another conference in Turkey. So my job this morning is to really welcome all of you. And again, good morning, distinguished guests, esteemed colleagues, students, honored speakers, and valued attendees, both physical and online. It is both a pleasure and a privilege to welcome you to this session of the UNISA Innovation Leadership Series. We are delighted to gather here today, leaders, visionaries, academics, practitioners, students, and change makers, all united by a shared commitment to pushing the boundaries of possibility within the higher education landscape. This innovation leadership session is more than an event. It is a dynamic platform for collaboration a crucible of bold ideas, a launching pad for transformative actions. This Innovation Leadership Series could not be more timely or relevant. Across the globe, universities are navigating unprecedented challenges of digital transformation, changing student expectations, funding constraints, falling enrollment numbers, and the ever-evolving demand of the labor market, which looks up to us as universities to produce graduates that are ready for the market. In this context, innovation is no longer a luxury or an option. It is an imperative. Universities are the incubators of knowledge, the catalysts of social mobility, and the engines of national and global progress. But to continue fulfilling this role, they must evolve. Innovation enables us as institutions of higher learning to reimagine teaching and learning with emerging technologies like artificial intelligence, machine learning, and other immersive and transformative technologies to build inclusive campuses that empower diverse learners, to rethink research, dissemination, and knowledge exchange, to forge deeper partnerships with industry, government, and civil society, and most critically, anticipate and shape the future rather than merely respond to it. At the heart of every great university is the courage to challenge convention and the curiosity to explore the unknown. This is the spirit we celebrate today in this session. Over the course of this innovation leadership session, we will hear from thought leaders and pioneers whose work is redefining what's possible in academia and beyond. Their insights will provide thought, provoke thought, spark dialogue, and inspire us to lead innovation with purpose, empathy, and resolve. I encourage each of you to engage fully, ask questions, make connections, and think boldly. Let this conference be a catalyst for the changes our august institution need and our engaged communities deserve. In closing, thank you for being here today. Your presence underscores your commitment to shaping a more innovative and resilient higher education future. Let's embark on this journey of inspiration and transformation together. And I would like to say welcome to the UNISA Innovation Leadership session today. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mr. Tsitego Segayejo. Perfect. Thank you so much, sir. So is everything sorted online? I know we had a bit of a problem there. Perfect. So, to the moment we've all been waiting for, I would like to call on stage Dr. Mclean Sibanda, Managing Director and Board Member of Begin Global. He has such a colorful biography, and it's quite long. And he asked me nicely not to read all of it, so I'll read some of it, but you do have it in front of you. That's the summarized version, by the way. So, but you will get a gist of what we're dealing with today. Mr. Sibanda, Dr. Sibanda is an accomplished patent attorney, engineer, and internationally respected innovation promoter with a 23-year career in intellectual property and related fields. Dr. Mclean Sibanda is the regional managing director of Begin Global and a member of the Begin board. Dr. Mclean is in fact, before joining Begin, Dr. Sibanda was the CEO of the Innovation Hub. South Africa, as well as treasurer of the International Association of Science Parks, IASP, and president of the IASP African Division. He is a dedicated professional and thought leader, skilled in infrastructure development, strategic turnaround, analytic skills, innovation and science parks management, and patent law. He's a published author of the book Nuts and Bolts, which you can get at the back, now available at all leading bookstores in South Africa. Ladies and gentlemen, Dr. Sibanda. As a matter of fact, we are. I was going to explain it when we're giving them away.
Okay, so let's project. Thank you very much, Matseho. Good morning, everyone, and good afternoon for those joining us from outside of the South African time zone. And also, good morning to the Deputy Vice Chancellor and all distinguished guests. So it is an honor for me to speak to you today. And I think part of the reason why, and I wasn't aware, I just got reminded, my wife just reminded me that 7 years ago, I graduated from this institution with my doctorate. So, perhaps that's how it was meant to be, for me to come back and be able to reflect in terms of some of the things that I've been working on for a couple of decades. So in the next 30 minutes, I am going to run through various things. I was asked, in essence, so the topic is nuts and bolts, innovation and entrepreneurship anecdotes. So I like stories, and part of writing, the book, Nuts and Bolts, was to tell the stories, because quite often when we talk about innovation, when we talk about entrepreneurship, we tend to use the wrong context, which is the developed world, US, Europe, and so forth. The context is different, and so yet we got amazing entrepreneurs, we got amazing innovators across the continent of Africa and across the different countries. Last week I was in Lesotho. Amazing people and what they're actually doing out there. So I think the future of Africa is indeed bright, and I believe that it's going to be brighter once we embrace issues of innovation, we embrace entrepreneurship, we embrace intellectual property, and we start to really understand the nuts and bolts of these things. And so the context of the outline of my talk is to give you the story behind the story, which is this book. And then I'll quickly then go on to look at Korea, because I think quite often when we do think about innovation and entrepreneurship, quite often it's at a macro level. However, I think at a micro level, but we need to go at a macro level and figure out how at a micro these micro things fit in and build the bigger picture. And also, I think we're going to learn a few lessons, and I talk about South Korea, not necessarily in this book, but in my second book called Footprints, which deals with intellectual property. I then delve into what I call support systems, and this is really taking you through some of the things in nuts and bolts, and some of my thoughts, since some of them have changed, and then I'll do a few stories, just to finish off. So I think the story behind the story, and people say, why did you write Nuts and Bolts? So I've told you why I wrote Nuts and Bolts, so that we can be able to tell the story. After 7.5 years of leading what I believe is really a gem of an institution, the Innovation Hub, I was reflecting on the different entrepreneurs that I was seeing every day, the different challenges that we are seeing every day. And also, being a government institution, the different challenges of leading a government institutions. And I talk in the book and say, over the period of 7.5 years, I probably had about 6 or 7 MECs that I reported to. I had a board that I reported to, and then I had a holdings board, and then I had a head of department, and then I had an MEC. And all of that really creates a complexity. And we're talking earlier with the Deputy Vice Chancellor here, that what we actually see, higher education institutions are also quite complex. But generally, I think from a global point of view, we're seeing complexity, and how do we actually thrive in that particular complexity. So 2004, I joined the Innovation Fund. I'd come from private sector, started off my career at De Beers, and then I went to Adams & Adams, where I became a patent attorney. And then 2004 to about 2009, I was with what was called the Innovation Fund, the precursor to the Technology Innovation Agency. And 2010 to 2011, I was a group executive at TIA. We were housed at the Innovation Hub, one of the buildings. I had no idea what was going on in the entire Innovation Hub. Up until one day when I was minding my own business, I got a call from a very good friend of mine, who then became my board chair, Dr. Nhlanhla Msomi, and said, these guys, your landlords are looking for a CEO. And I said, well, I'm not a landlord. I can't. And they said, no, it's bigger than that. They want to reposition this institution to focus on innovation. And then, long story short, went through a couple of interviews, and they offered me the job. And the mandate that I was given is, this is not a business park. This is meant to focus on innovation, and your job is to turn it around and let it focus on innovation. So in the book, I go through in detail, particularly the first part in terms of what we had to do. So I come into an institution and I face a management team that was in war with its own board. And on reflection, this is meant to be focusing on science and innovation, and none of the management team even have a science degree. So that was the first error. And then we start to then look at innovation. We'll start to look at entrepreneurship, incubation. There were about 8 entrepreneurs that were incubated, and all of them in ICT. And then we then started to look at the entire Gauteng strategy and say, well, what does really Gauteng believe in? Why did they set up this institution? What are the competencies of Gauteng? Where does Gauteng want to be in the future? And then we identified that it was ICT, it was green economy, and it was bioeconomy. And then basis that, we formulated a strategy. Within 45 days of being appointed, we presented to the board a strategy for a turnaround. And the board gave us the support, and then went on. At the time, I had a team of about 18 people. And remember, none of them had a science degree. And then we had to then get in the specialists. So the book goes into a lot of detail. It might, look a bit thick. Why? Because there's dedicated chapters. If you're interested in biotech, there is actually a section that deals with that. ICT, there's a section that deals with that. Green economy, there's a section that deals, with that. And in essence, we built, that over 7.5 years. By the time I left a team of over 100 people that were actually working, most of them specialists. We had grown the incubation from 8 to about 450 entrepreneurs right across the continent. Right across the province. We had moved from here in Linwood to right all over the province into the townships. We took innovation to our people in the townships. We opened what we call legacy labs. And so in essence, this actually maps out the pathway that we took. The different phases. Phase 1 of the Innovation Hub was before I even got there. Phase 2 was when they actually built the infrastructure. Phase 3 is the phase that I played a role. Phase 4 is part of it up until 2018. When I left, is that that phase that I call mainstreaming innovation and growing it for impact. And so we move from just calling this a science park into an innovation agency of the province, which catered for everyone across the province. We looked at gaming, we looked at social innovations, we looked at how you address challenges within the communities. And so that is, in essence, the story behind, the story. But some of us may want to reflect and say, but, what is innovation? And being a patent attorney, quite often the other word that comes into mind is invention. And these two are different concepts, because invention is really coming up with a new idea. It's, the ideation, and there's a problem. You come up, well, I think this is how we can do it. It's never been done before. So it's a process of putting in money or investing significant resources and getting new knowledge. So that is invention. But when we talk about innovation, it's taking that new knowledge and actually putting it into practice and solving the problems in a manner that someone is able to pay you for it, or they're able to derive value. But the definition of innovation that I like is one by the late Professor Clayton Christensen, which says it's a change in the process by which an organization is able to transform labor, it's able to transform capital, it's able to transform materials or information into products and or services of a greater value. And in the book that they put together called the Prosperity Paradox, they deal with different types of innovations, and the ones that I believe would make a significant difference to the continent of Africa are what we call market creating innovations, because these are not just sustaining innovations. They're actually disruptive in a manner that they actually create value chains. And so when we look at Korea, for example, this is a country that in 1959 was poorer than Mozambique. 1959, Korea was poorer than Mozambique. They just come out of the war. And in reality, there was nothing that was going for them. But today, when we reflect on Korea, we look at the top 10, patentees in the United States, Patent and Trademark Office. We see Samsung, we see, LG, and you can count them. Even when we actually look around, everyday life, some of us drive, Kia, we drive Hyundai. These are things that came out of South Korea. I mean, I remember in 1999, my boss then had a Hyundai. And we laughed at this car because, at the time, who drives a Hyundai, right? Where is a Hyundai from? And Toyota was a superior brand, Mercedes, etc. But fast forward, these guys have built an incredible automotive, industry. How did they do it? And I talk about it, in I think in footprints. So I think this is where universities come in, but also where governments come in terms of how do we ensure that our education system is aligned to long-term economic, planning. So we are not all the way through, right from primary, education, secondary education, higher education. And what I've seen, in essence, in many countries, and South Africa counted, is that much of our focus is on higher education. It's matric and then beyond. So why don't we start to teach young people about innovation, entrepreneurship, intellectual property at a young age, before they're even 5? Why don't they learn those concepts? So Korea built a higher education system based on a very sound, high quality schooling system. And so again, we need to go back And some people say, well, it's too late. You can't fix things, an aeroplane whilst you're in motion. At some point, you're going to crash anyway. So you might as well attempt to do it now. And if you're going to crash, well, hopefully you've not gained, too much altitude. There'll be survivors. So we need to look at the role of higher education in economic, development. So in terms of Korea, they looked and said, well, the human capital that we're producing, is it relevant for growth? Is there a need for these people by industry? And they found that actually many of the graduates that they're producing were not relevant, for industry. So long-term planning, thinking, what do we want to be in the future? So the sectors that you see Korea actually being, good at today are sectors that they chose way back, 1960, that far back, and over a period of time, they build the capabilities. So when I say go back to primary school, just understand that it takes a long time to train a graduate that actually would be out there having a master's, a PhD. So we really thinking about 20-year horizon. We have to plan for each of these youngsters. And the one thing that we, quite often when we talk about intellectual property, we tend to focus largely in terms of what we are creating. And what Korea did is they identified, companies. Samsung was a small family-owned business, and the others, and they say to them, what do you need for you to scale? How do you see yourself fitting into the future, South Korea? And they said, well, we need these technologies. I said, where are these technologies? Well, these technologies are in the US or they're in Japan. So, okay, fine. Go and negotiate. We will go with you and negotiate for those. In certain cases, they license them in other cases, they acquire those technologies. So there's a need in developing not only startups, but also in developing high-tech industries to combine both your own intellectual property and other people's intellectual property. We can talk about it, later, perhaps, during, the fireside. But there's a lot of intellectual property that is out there in the public domain, because the whole concept of intellectual property is that it is territorial. So what is protected in South Africa, yes, you cannot actually just take and use. But what is protected in Japan or United States and is not protected in South Africa, that's free for anyone, to use. So if we track, and here we're starting from 1970, to 2020, and there's two lines in essence that I want you to focus on. The one is GDP, which is a greenish line, and you can see the GDP, how it moves, but also track what the patent line is doing. It is tracking the GDP. So the first observation is that there is a correlation between the patent output and the GDP. But what exactly is that correlation? The correlation is the investment in research and development. So when a country takes a decision and says we're going to have 1% of GDP as an investment in research and development, what that country is saying is that we are investing in growing our economy. Because GDP is a moving target. As GDP goes up, that 1% does not just increase incrementally. That 1% actually increases, exponentially. So long-term planning, and you can see at the beginning, what happened. Between 1970 and 1980, if you look at this, it's almost like a flat line. Now, the challenge that I see, not only in our country, but in many countries in the continent, is that we move from governments of 5 years to government of 5 years, and a new minister comes in, and I talk about it in the book as well. A new minister comes in, and they want to do things differently. And all the gains that have been made in the previous 5 years are actually gone. So we need to actually really, sit back and say, what do we want to do in the future? if we're going to change the future of this continent, we're going to have to do things differently. We cannot be thinking and planning from election year to election year. It can't. It will never give us the kind of economic development that we require. So let me shift and then look at, fine, we've got innovations. Let's assume that our governments then invest in research and development. Let's assume that our governments put aside money to support entrepreneurs. They establish these institutions like the Innovation Hub, Tumulokong, other incubators. Now, why is that important? And Stephen Johnson actually says, if you look at history, innovation has not come just from people giving people incentives. It comes from actually creating the right kind of an environments where ideas can connect. And this is where institutions like the Innovation Hub, the incubators, are really important. And within the context of higher education institutions, this is where I think your technology transfer offices also become quite important. Because, as I said earlier, we need to move from invention, which is ideation, into innovation. And so ideation is just the first part of it, to say, well, there is a problem to be solved. And what could be the potential solutions? And then you take those potential solutions into an incubation environment. And through an incubation environment, you then refine, those. And if you don't do that, those ideas will become obsolete. Because if the problem is big enough, someone else out there is thinking about finding a solution to it, right? So, on the right is quite an interesting article because, and this is where at times we've got to make hard choices. And what I've seen in many of the countries where, I do, some work is that, quite often we want to be everything to everyone. But I think we need to take a step back and say, if we're going to do the huge changes that will then have an impact on an economy right across, maybe we need to listen to Pareto when he says 80-20, right? Put in 80% of your resources into 20% that will give you the 80% impact. And so when I talk about innovation and entrepreneurship, it's really looking at startups. And in this case, I'm looking for scalable, businesses. So there's a lot of entrepreneurs, in the continent. You drive, from Entebbe to Kampala, you just see people selling everything everywhere. You can even buy a coffin, on the street, right? That's entrepreneurship because they are solving for a problem. Someone would go and buy. It means that there's a problem that they're solving for. But is it scalable? That's the question. How much of an impact will it have? And so this article actually makes one actually think. And so my submission to you this morning is that we really need to have high growth, medium-sized enterprises or focus on startups. And these are scalable businesses that will have a huge, broader impact. So over the years, and in nuts and bolts, I make a statement which in some circles have been criticized, but I think it's correct. Because when I led the Innovation Hub, I looked at the people that were supporting the entrepreneurs. Some of them had never sold anything. They had never built a business. So how can you then tell someone and mentor someone to build a business when you have never built a business yourself? So, and it's something to really reflect on. And I say to people, if you're going to go into the space of supporting entrepreneurs, be an entrepreneur, sell something, sell golden products, sell Amway, sell vegetables, sell something. Be rejected. Let someone reject you because then you understand what it means to be an entrepreneur. And so we're seeing this growing number of hubs across the continent. and some of them are set up by people that have never sold anything. And if you look then impact 5 years, 10 years, and you look at what is coming out, quite often there is very little that is coming out. In fact, what we see are entrepreneurs running from one incubator to another incubator. And we need, somehow to develop a system to manage this. And part of, developing the ecosystems is saying, what training do we need for people that are going to be manning these support systems? So in Footprints, I talk about what we did in South Africa to train the technology transfer, personnel, and most of them are still. They're the ones that are actually anchoring NIPMO. They're the ones that are anchoring the TTOs. It has to be deliberate. And so as we see all these hubs, coming out, it shows that there's a hunger for entrepreneurship. It shows that there is recognition, that entrepreneurship is, the answer. But entrepreneurship on its own is not going to actually solve the problem, because you actually need to look at the innovation aspects, something new, and then you get someone that is able to see the gap. That's the entrepreneur, is able to see the opportunity and wants to take the risk, to go to the market. And so when we look, and many people say, you actually need funding. So I was talking to one of the my proteges from Rwanda that's building a business in Rwanda, yesterday, and she says to me, I disagree. This notion of you don't need money to start a business is not correct. I said, you don't need money to start a business, but you need money to scale a business. And that's where she is, because she's now facing the growing pains, the scaling pains. And so how do you then start a business without money? You bootstrap it. You put in your sweat, you borrow from uncles, family, friends, and fools, and you push, you prove that you are solving a problem, and you develop a minimum viable product that you can then show to people. You sell to a couple of friends, and I'll show you examples later of entrepreneurs that have actually done that. And you then at some point get to a funder and say, listen, we have a market, we have customers, and this is what they say about what we have. So in South Africa, there is no lack of funding. In fact, there's lots of funding in South Africa. But the problem is that the funding is in the wrong places. So there's a missing middle. There's a point somewhere at the beginning where it's not really right at the beginning, but somewhere closer to the beginning, where you need that critical small amount of money. It's not like the 1 million, 2 million. It's about 50,000 Rand. It's about 200,000 Rand for you to be able to actually develop the market, produce a prototype, and actually go out to market. And that missing middle, unfortunately, is not really solved, because when you get the accelerators are funded by business, and business funds accelerators because they want to align those accelerators with their own priorities as business. So the Startup Support Program that I talk about in the book was developed as a means or a response to seeing this need of entrepreneurs, these innovators that were coming to us every day and say, listen, we have something, here it is, but we need just 200,000 Rand. And I'll show you what we're able to do with like giving entrepreneurs 500,000 Rand or, 300,000 Rand. And one of the challenges with many of the funding, institutions is that they take long. You apply at the beginning of the year for funding, and by November, they're still considering it. Now, innovation does not have those timelines, right? So one of the things that we did when we positioned this instrument, we said it needs to be quick decisions. Within a month, whether you're going to get funding or not. And we built a credible investment committee made up of entrepreneurs, made up of also funders, and the funders were there so that if these guys achieve a target, the milestone, these funders should then be able to step in with the additional amount of funding. The other thing that I talk about in the book is competitions. And I talk about competitions, how we use competitions, first of all, to provide the much needed funding by the entrepreneurs, and secondly, to build a pipeline for incubation. So we conceptualize what we call the GAP, which at the time was the Gauteng Accelerator Program. I think that's still what they call it. But for us, because we're based in Gauteng, it was GP. So with this, it was an instrument that sought to ensure that it's mission driven, the learning is mission driven, it's integrative, it's multi-directional. You provide an award, and you give these guys 20,000 Rand. They can go buy a new suit or go and do whatever. But the balance of the funding is actually milestone based. It's for them to build their own businesses, right? But having said that, I can tell you war stories. Beware, there's other people, other entrepreneurs that are serial competition entrepreneurs. They just enter one competition after the other. And there's an amazing guy. This guy was taking a Coca-Cola bottle, and he had a solar, device that you then push in, and then you screw. As you tighten, the bottle, it lights up. Great device, great, innovation. Why? Because Coca-Cola goes everywhere. They distribute everywhere. So, from a distribution channel point of view, he had it all sorted out. So all he needed to do was just focus on getting it into the market. But he entered competition after competition after competition after competition. It never scaled. So, with that, scaling, I've spoken about scaling, and some of you have heard me talking about scaling. Scaling is hard. It's hard, and I'll show you in 2 slides as to why scaling, is hard. And Christensen actually talks about the job to be done, framework. And he's saying that people don't want to buy a 1/4-inch drill. They want a 1/4-inch hole. So if you're making drills, just understand why would people buy the drill? So there's a job to be done. So when you are innovating as an entrepreneur or as an innovator, just understand what is the job to be done. What is this product or service? What job is it going to be hired to do? How often is it going to be hired? Because the how often also tells you in terms of whether you've got a scalable business, right? If you're going to make a cell phone for me that I just have it forever, you're not going to be in business for long, right? So, I hire the cell phone so that I can make calls, I can send messages, I can browse the internet, I can record, I can take pictures, right? But when you go back to 1993, when the cell phones came out, the job to be done was not that, right? So you actually then have to understand what the needs of the market, are. So, and here I talk about not every business idea can scale, and we need to distinguish between startups and MSMEs or SMEs, because some businesses are great. They're going to provide for the family. They're great, for that, but they're not going to scale. And so when we support these businesses, or when you present your idea to the technology transfer office, at times it may not be as acceptable because it's not going to scale. It's a great idea, but it's not going to scale. So technology becomes important, and the innovation component becomes, important. And I think the IP component helps in terms of just being able to compete in the marketplace, because there's other people in the marketplace. How do you create a monopoly? And I mean, that's a whole masterclass on its own, because it does not mean that you have to patent everything. At times, it's best to keep quiet and keep it as a secret as opposed to patenting it. And so when we look at the scaling, there are perhaps three components around entrepreneurship and innovation, in my mind. The one is a jockey. And so when you get into an incubator, the question is, does the incubator support the entrepreneur, the jockey, to develop an entrepreneurial mindset, to be resilient, to move forward? The second one is the horse. And the horse is really looking now at the idea, the business model, and the strategy. And so this is where you go through things like the business model canvas. You actually then ask the question, what is the job to be done? And the third one is a race course, which is looking at the ecosystem in totality, issues around how you're going to distribute, this product to the market. What are the barriers of entry into the market? What is the funding, looking like? Is it actually properly, positioned, across, that value chain? And in his book, Jason Goldberg, and he just published it, I think about, earlier in the year. And it's an incredible book. I would encourage you to buy this book because it talks about scaling. Scaling is hard. Scaling is hard because in scaling, when you start, all you're focusing on is finding something worth scaling. All you're doing is just proving that the idea does work, that there is a market. And you build a small team. At times it's about 10 people, if you're lucky. At times actually less than that. At times it can be 10 to 25 people. And then you realize, yes, this is actually worth scaling. So now you want to build a successful business, which is making profit, and it can be able to return dividends to the investors. And now you're running into 80 people, and so forth, and beyond expansion. So you have to cross those particular crises. And I mean, the first crisis that you actually face is one of competition. Because if you're the first one in the market, just understand that someone is going to want to copy you. And when they copy you, they're going to come in with a lower price. When they come in with a lower price, what it does is that it cuts off your profits, because you will also be forced to lower your price, right? So that's the first constraint that you actually face. The second one is actually just the complexity part of it. And the complexity comes in because, remember, as a founder, I start the business at home in my shower. I'm showering and I come up with this idea. And then I start the company and I build the idea. I am the founder. I am also the board. I make the decisions in the shower. And then I bring in somebody else. Now we have to meet at the water dispenser or at the coffee machine, right? So now I'm no longer making the decisions alone in the shower. Now there's two people. We're making the decisions together. So that's, in the second one. And then we bring on board a third person because we realize that we need someone that is out there selling into the market. Now there are three channels. So every time we meet at the coffee machine, I need to make sure that the third person is actually there, because if they are not there, they are left behind. Now, there are three connections. You bring in a fourth person, the connections is no longer 4, it's 6. You bring in a fifth person, there are 10 connections. And that's why many businesses struggle. That's why many entrepreneurs actually do not scale, because they're actually used to making the decisions on their own. And then as they add on new people, the culture of the organization changes. Because initially the culture was in the shower. It moved to the coffee machine. And at some point it moves to the boardroom. And at some point, then there's rumblings in the corridors. And so size, more people, less control, and less connections you're not able to connect. And then the last point that I want to talk about before going to the stories is also, what do you outsource and what do you insource? Incredible story of the Greek tragedy, of Dell and Asus. I think this is it was an Acer. So Dell, I think, was built as in 1985, and Asus came, I think, 4 years later. Now, what Dell was good at was basically you could actually, go in, mail order, you basically customize your own laptop in essence, and they would deliver it to you within 48 hours. That's how good they were. That was their business model. But as they scaled and more demand came, they could not make as many. So what did they do? They outsourced to a company, Asus. Now, Asus, I think they're Taiwanese, if I'm not wrong, were good at making motherboards. And they had a good relationship with Intel. And so they said, well, we can make the motherboards. Here are the motherboards. And then Dell said, well, can you make the casing? And say, yeah, we can make the casing. So what did Dell do is I went to Asus and gave them the drawings, the molds and everything. And Asus actually started to make, this. And say, okay, fine, we can make the entire thing. So you just focus on sales. Great, that's what they did. The next thing is Asus launched their own computer. So what had Dell done? Dell had outsourced the core capabilities of their business. And when they were doing so, it was great for the shareholders because the shareholders were seeing great returns. There were less liabilities on their balance sheet, which looked good. But over a period of time, it cost them because then now the people that they had outsourced to were now competing with them. So as one actually scales, you need to actually be careful in terms of what are you outsourcing? Is it your core capabilities? Are you giving away the core capabilities, the things that are really important for you to actually to be able to compete? And so I'll finish off with about 4 stories, 4 or 5 entrepreneurs. And people ask me, well, what was it like, being CEO of the Innovation Hub? I say, well, one of the things that it did is it humbled me. It at the same time, it affirmed my resolve that the future of Africa is bright. Because I was interacting with the guys at the hub, I was interacting with the guys in Botswana, be invited to Kenya, and I see, the magic that we have, the talent that we have in this continent. But I think one of the other things that for me was a realization is that knowing why you're doing something is important. And we found that the why was important because every time we interviewed the guys that came into incubation, we asked them, why are you doing this? And the ones that told us, I want to make money, most of them failed. They did not succeed. And I can count in tons of them that actually said, no, we want to make lots of money. I said, you're not going to succeed because you got to actually understand what is a job to be solved. And so we look at Smart Sport, founded by Leslie Scott, a professor at Wits University. And what problem were they solving for? They're solving for a problem of TB diagnostics. Because Gene Express, which is a machine that is used worldwide for TB diagnostics, has got particular inputs that it requires, and these guys came up with a way of printing TB on and basically shipping it all around the world. And basis that they were solving for a particular problem that Gene Express had, and they've gone beyond just TB. They're now, solving for other strains. So in each one of these is actually a link, I think, to their website for you to actually get, more ideas. So now how did the support system enable them? She came in through a competition. And through the competition, remember, there's like 20 or 30,000 that you can go and do whatever you want. The rest of it, you put it into milestones. And so that money helped them for them to be able to start to develop, diagnostics for other diseases. We look at Ntutuko Shezi, also detailed in the book, and I think he contributed a component, of his story into the book. He comes up with an idea. I meet him at I think to South African breweries, evening in Sandton. He says to me, someone says, "Oh, that guy there is actually running the innovation hub." So he comes, we have a chat, and he says, "I've got an idea." So I say, "Come and meet me and the team." He comes over and meets me and the incubation team. He says, "Well, I grew up in the rural areas. I understand wealth is actually through cattle. But many people have moved to the urban areas, and at times when there is umsebenzi or, like family function, people struggle to actually find, cattle or goats or whatever. So I've come up with an idea where people can actually invest in livestock, but they don't have to actually look after the livestock. I'll look after the livestock." And how this works, and every time it gives birth, that you've got an addition to the family, and so you had a model in terms of which they would then take every second, offspring, that came out. And in his words, going to a credible support, system gave him first of all credibility. Because when he goes out and looks for the market, he says, "This is my address. I'm being supported by this organization." Secondly, he got funding. He had about, I think, 300,000 Rand, which he used to buy his first stock of cattle. But also that money was critical because these guys had to use cow train and so forth. So they used part of the money to actually be able to get going up until they could raise the bigger amounts of money once they'd proven the idea. And the third thing that they gained was actually networks. Being in that particular environment, they had access, to networks, financial services, etc. And so 10 million Rand was injected by 2018. I think they've raised more money. He's expanded the business into macadamia, nut industry. The business is now valued 100 million, and there were plans, for a broader African expansion. Now, the third business that I want to talk about is Altis Biologics. I met these guys, I think, in 2006. He was a researcher at Wits University doing postdoc under Professor Ripamonti. He left Wits and he went to TUT. And what we were solving for, the problem that we were solving for was that many people have an injury, spine or hip. And once you've had a hip replacement, quite often you're going to have another hip replacement. And so they came up with a product that allows for bone growth, for the bone to actually grow back. And initially it was targeted at the hips, hip bones, and then they went to, you could work on other fractured bones. And eventually they found a market for dental, as well. And enabled by infrastructure, they needed bigger facilities, they needed to be in a non-academic environment. We provided them with the facilities at the hub, which we helped them to actually, repurpose, and we supported them with IP. They obtained, patents, European patents and US patents, and their first major breakthrough was when Discovery said, fine, we're going to take this product and doctors, surgeons can now prescribe it. And they're now expanding into the international market. So that's that's their, part of their injectable, and they're growing into Brasilia, Brazil, now. The next one, interesting guy, and he invites me for dinner. We go to Callisto's in the south of Johannesburg. Callisto's is a Portuguese outlet. We see it, we have dinner, and they bring out these very nice condiments, like they're like nice and spicy, very nice. And he says, "These are mine, and these guys are just making them for me because they've got the capability, and this is what I want to develop further." He meets with the team at the biopark, and they accept him in and they help him to develop the idea further. And part of the question that I kept on asking myself is, but where is the innovation here? Where is the IP here? But first of all, remember, talk about the three things: the jockey, the racehorse, and the horse. We had a jockey that was passionate. He knew what he wanted to do, and nothing could deter him. And so he developed this idea further and refined it, further. He formulated trademarks. He set up the company Makamisa. And for the Nguni-speaking people, it's actually, you can recognize it because when you eat something that's hot, you kamisa, you open your mouth. So that was the birth of the company. That's him and his wife. And so 2015 they joined the hub. 2017 they developed the formula. 2019 he graduated from the incubator. 2020 got 56 million rand from the IDC. He's got a huge factory in Isando. He now manufactures and does toll manufacturing, not only for himself, but also for established brands, the famous foods, brands. He's developed intellectual property in terms of just trade secrets around how to, manage this. Created a lot of jobs. And the last one is, Portia Mgomezulu. She came to us in I think it was about 2016, yeah. And she was producing marula oil, and her story is in nuts and bolts. And she started producing it at home. Trained as an electronics engineer, she was working for Siemens. She's producing this, and then no labels, taking it to the ladies at church, and the orders kept on coming. And she'd get home from work and make this in the kitchen. Eventually, she needed bigger space. Came to the Innovation Hub, provided bigger space, supported with also some funding from the Startup Support Program. She developed more. And we moved there into 500 square meters because the demand was actually growing. Pick and Pay came on board and said, we're going to give you space. Became part of the Pick and Pay enterprise supply, development. She moved. In essence, what you see here is one of the stores. I think I've visited one of the stores in Eswatini. I've seen a couple in Gauteng. Today, what she has is, in essence, a marula range, pomegranate range, a baby range, a men's range. She employs a lot of people and enabled, in essence, first of all, the jockey was right. She knew what she wanted. And the horse, the business model did work because she knew what other products were out in the market and how she positioned, herself. And the race course was actually right because she understood what forms of funding, but it was more than funding. For her, it was a distribution channels that she needed to get out into Pick and Pay, to get out into Discam. They've moved out of the Innovation Hub. They moved to Centurion. Now they were building their own, factory with her husband. She's been an award, winner of, many awards. She's created incredible jobs. I think for me, it's probably one of the fastest growing, cosmetic businesses in the continent. So as I conclude, I want to reflect on what Paul Ryan, who was once a one-time vice presidential nominee, said, is that behind every small business, there's a story that's worth knowing. All the corner shops in the towns, in the cities, and the restaurants, the gyms, the cleaners, the hardware stores, these just didn't come out of nowhere. There's a story. A lot of heart goes into each one of them. Nobody did their thinking. Nobody did their worrying. Nobody did their sweating. And we have, I think, great, potential. So, you get the slides, but, this talks about, in essence, a framework for innovation ecosystem for development. This was developed in 2023 for UNECA. And just to, conclude, this is my last slide, is that, we have to then, look at when we're developing, innovations, we're developing solutions, is what problem are we solving for? And I believe that the SDG goals are a nice framework to actually say, what are we really solving for? Food security, health security, water security, what is it? And I think at a macro level, country level, we need to invest significantly in research and development. No one is going to save us. So, and we've seen it, America draws, USAID comes out, we're in trouble. So we have to build these, systems for ourselves. We need to build the capacity to research. We need to build the capacity to innovate, the capacity to commercialize. And we need to be clear in terms of what is the picture of success. So if we reflect on South Korea, they knew that they're going to be leaders in ICT, in automotive industry, and so forth. They knew way before they were. And they started to behave as if they were. And so that's how we build ecosystems. We need to start to have the right posture of we are there. And so in putting together the ecosystems, the different components, is really understanding what, remember, you're as strong you're strong as your weakest link, right? So you need to actually understand where are the weakest parts of this value chain, and you need to then fix that so that you can then strengthen, the bond. And the whole idea is that we need to reduce luck and provide more predictability, into the system. And so I think some of you are entrepreneurs here, some of you are innovators, and I would say, within the academic environment, is that not every academic is meant to go out and be a founder. Some are very good at just coming up with the ideas. That's great. Build a team, find a good CEO that's going to be out there. You keep the ideas coming. You keep on solving for the problem that needs to be solved. And I hope this has been useful. With that, thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Dr. Sibanda. That was truly insightful. And truly I can resonate with the fact that behind every startup, behind every idea, there's a face and there's a person who is looking to find a solution. I can attest that I'm a client of Portia M, and it's so exciting to see where she comes from and how she started and how you contributed, or the Innovation Hub contributed, to bringing her to what she is today. So that's very exciting. And a round of applause for Dr. Sibanda again. Thank you so much. So now we're going to be coming to I think, a very important segment, because then it's a conversation between Dr. Sibanda and his audience. And the person who is going to be leading this segment, whom it belongs to, is Mr. Noma, who's stepped out for a couple of minutes. He'll be back shortly. Ma'am, I will be bothering you for this one as well. This is where the competition comes in. So in this next segment, Dr. Sibanda and Mr. Noma are going to be sitting here. Kangwelo and Sabina, may I please ask that you assist me with this one? Can we please move these chairs a bit closer? I think they're too far away. Just a bit closer so that everybody can have a full view of the gentlemen when they're sitting down. So in this vase, yes. This is the Q&A session that I mentioned earlier on, right? Now there's questions. It's called the wait, I'll tell you now. It's on your programs, but I don't have a program in front of me. Fireside chat. It's the fireside chat where Mr. Noma, the director of the DITC, and Dr. Sibanda are going to be sitting down and having a conversation. Mr. Noma is going to be asking him questions, he's going to be replying, and they're going to have a very good conversation based on the presentation and based on the landscape of Africa currently. Secondly, when we were sending out invites for you to attend, we asked that you send through your questions that are directed to Dr. Sibanda. Here are the questions. Thank you. There's Mr. Noma. A round of applause for him, please. Thank you, sir. Here are about 40 questions that you online and you in person sent through for us to ask Dr. Sibanda. 40 questions are a lot of conversation, so I'm sure we're not going to go through all of them. What we will do, though, as part of the competition, the first 3 questions that come out of this here vase are going to win a prize. Okay, so cross your fingers wherever you are. I'm going to be putting them in front of them, of the gentlemen. So first, there's going to be a conversation, which is the official fireside chat between Mr. Noma and Dr. Sibanda. Secondly, we're going to go through these questions. That's where ma'am is going to assist, where she will be taking 2 of the 3 questions for the competition, ask Dr. Sibanda as well. And then after that, if we have time, if time permits, we'll take a few more questions. Then we'll open the floor for the people who are here, if at all there are any more questions, as well as the people online. Is that clear? Perfect. Thank you so much. A round of applause for Mr. Ayanda Noma, who is the director of the DITC, and Dr. Sibanda.
Thank you so much, Maseko. Thank you. Good afternoon, colleagues. That was a master class, by the way. It was really a master class, and I was taking notes, a lot of notes. There were some new ideas that were sparked, by the conversation, for your presentation. And what perhaps most people may not know is that I'm one of the people that benefited from the training, the tech transfer, in a sense, moving from a science policy, now to building a tech transfer system, in the country was one of those that are very exciting. And I'm still happy in the tech transfer space. So, and I mean, I was intrigued, by, some of the points that you made, during the presentation. I want to go straight to the point. It's clear that in our space there are challenges. Our system, I mean, our sort of economy is not growing, it's not expanding, right? We are we really building these kinds of tech entrepreneurs, that actually create, for instance, the market creating innovations that you're talking about in our system? How do we do that? If you were to list maybe 5 points, what are the things that we've got to do? Perhaps maybe we can start with the challenges that we have. Then we can get now to the actual, 5 points. What is it? What are the things that we need to do?
So I think some of the things we are doing, I believe there's a need for refinement. So for me, is really looking. We have to look at where we come from as a people. So we come from a history of separatism, of apartheid, where a huge part of the population was in essence left out of the economy. Some of that has had a knock-on effect in terms of, just see the way of thinking, the culture, even in the home, and the education system. So that's why, for me, the starting point would be almost a total revamp of the education system. So we need to actually go to the primary, level, do what China is doing, do what Korea is doing, teaching these kids about innovation, about entrepreneurship, about intellectual property, right at the early stage. And we need to support, those ideas. So that is one thing. The other thing is we've got institutions that we've set up. And we need to make sure that these institutions respond in the manner in which we've set them up. I spoke about applying for funding and 12 months later, you're still waiting. That is not acceptable. And I think we need to make sure that these institutions that are charged with funding, literally within 3 months, at the very worst, are able, to respond. I think at a macro level, we need to invest in research and development. There is no doubt about it. So if you actually look, Ayanda, what has happened is that, yes, GDP has grown, but our investment in research and development has declined.
Yeah.
And you need to go back and look at what has really happened in the landscape in South Africa. So 2004, if you looked at the patent landscape,
Yeah.
the major contributors were De Beers, Element 6. There was a bit of Anglo. There was a few Anglo-related companies and Sasol.
Yeah.
But if you had to map out today, some of those have disappeared completely. What we're seeing is actually a lot of the universities have come on board.
Yeah.
They've embraced in intellectual property. So we need to then look at how do we build the next Sasols.
Yeah, definitely. Yep.
So that's another thing that we actually need to be looking at. So when we look at these ideas coming out of the higher education sector, the R&D sector, how do we actually identify some of them, for scaling?
Yeah. I mean, it's quite interesting that you talk about the declining contribution, to R&D. I actually looked at the recent statistics suggest that we are spending 0.68%. It has gone down. I think at some point in time we're sitting close to about 0.91. All right, and that's not a good place, to be in. So, I mean, if you mentioned some of the points that you mentioned, some of them may seem, you mentioned something around, changing the engine in mid-flight, and I think that's quite radical. And do we have the right skills? Are we maybe let me put it differently, right? Are we solving the right problems? Do we have that kind of national focus? Because one of the things when we were talking about, sort of the examples of Korea, there was deliberateness sort of in their approach, right? There was Han 1, there was Han 2, right? Very much focused, in terms of where the areas that we want as a country, the country wanted to develop, sort of preeminence in. Do we have that kind of steadfast approach? And do we have it more as a systemic, sort of approach that the entire system, all of it, sort of geared towards building those competencies?
I think the pockets of excellence are there. And so, if you look at what we did as a country in the early 2000s, we invested significantly on biotechnology.
Yeah.
And the fruits of that, we can see it, because when you look at the patent outputs that's actually coming out and you look at the startups that actually emerged over the last 30 years, you can see them. They're actually in the biotech area. So
yes.
it for me, it attests to the fact that when you invest in an area and with a long-term focus, you can get the results. I think there's been significant investment on energy, particularly around hydrogen. By the Department of Science and Innovation, we're starting to see some of that. I think the recent strategy for the department provides a long-term picture of where we want to be as a country.
Yeah.
However, the question that I ask myself is, as a government, are all the government departments aligned, to that? Or are we pulling in different, areas?
Yeah.
So I think there's a need, almost, if you look at China, you look at Japan, innovation, intellectual property reports to the highest office, because these are the drivers for the economy. So is there a way that we can find at the presidency a way of integrating the long-term plan? I think going beyond just the national development plan, because it's not working. And one is hoping that the dialogue that is upcoming will be able to address some of those issues.
Yeah, and interestingly, because I was sitting there and I was thinking that could we perhaps maybe talk about a national innovation strategy? Beyond just, I know that there's a 10-year, it's a national government departments, and so forth, because it's also linked to organizations that actually steer the science system. As you mentioned, that is sitting, the reports in some countries, it reports to the very highest office. You've got, other agenda setting structures in most countries. I know that at some point in time in my previous life, one of the things that we're agitating for was a sort of a innovation council that reports to the president. Could that be an answer? Could that be a way for us to actually get, everybody aligned? Because I'm thinking as an example, for instance, going back, we funded Joule, right? We established, this car. This car is nowhere at this point in time. But also we had something else, PBMR, and of course we never get to realize these benefits, right? Perhaps maybe, now looking at it from, a different perspective to say, maybe if these things are driven at a very high level, with all of government, being part of that, could that be perhaps maybe at least help us towards getting us somewhere?
Yeah, so I think having all of government involved and I think integrated at the highest level, I would support that. I think we've got enough strategies. I think from a strategy point of view, we're not short of strategy, we're not short of policies. I actually think that it's now really time to implement and hold people accountable. I think the examples that you speak about, the Joule and the PBMR, it's really part of what I refer to, where we don't really take a long-term focus.
Yeah.
Because now we're faced with an energy crisis. What if we had continued developing the Pebble Bird, modular reactor? What if? Where would we be? And if you look at the capabilities that we built, where are they?
Yes.
These are actually sitting internationally.
Yeah.
They sit, someone else saw the value and they took it. But I think, again, as a country, remember, we've got many challenges. We've got the challenges of poverty. We've got the challenges of inequality, the challenges of unemployment. And at times, in my mind, when we make the decisions as to where to move the resources, we think quite often short term.
Yeah.
Whereas at times, and that's what I say, at times you don't have to be everything to everyone. Mm-hmm. At times you have to actually get us to suffer delayed gratification so that investment reaps some rewards somehow into the future.
Yeah. And looking at some of the strategies that you were alluding to say that we've got enough strategies, and again linking it to what you said, earlier, to say we tend to have a 5-year horizon in terms of sort of our thinking and planning. Even though we may have a strategy, but 5 years, the new minister comes on board and they start doing things completely different, and then that changes the whole texture, sort of the implementation. And I think that's problematic. That's part of the reason why we find ourselves in this kind of problems, that we have. So what looking now at closer to the universities, right? What is it that perhaps maybe what are the additional that we should be doing to actually, support, this national, or at least this drive or this understanding that we should really be the hub that produces all these sort of innovations, market creating innovations, and of course, other forms of innovations that actually drive the economic growth.
Yeah, so the higher education sector, I think, is doing quite a lot in my mind, but I think there is still more that can be done. First of all, I think the engagement with industry and really understanding what industry will require in the future, and in the future is not 5 years for me, it's actually 10 and beyond is important. I think it's important for the higher education sector to really understand what are the skills that will be required 10, 20 years from now, understand what are the disruptions that AI and robotics and other emerging technologies are going to have, not only within the higher education sector, but also in terms of the jobs market, what jobs are going to be obsolete, and actually start to contribute in terms of a discourse and a pathway in that particular direction. And I think the last one is, I think, more significant emphasis on innovations that address the challenges that we face. So these are innovations that can be commercialized. But here also there's, I throw in caution, because I've seen it in discussions with many, leaders in the higher education sector. They see the innovation as being a new form of revenue.
Okay.
So it's exactly the same problem that I said earlier about the entrepreneurs. When they say we're doing this for money, they're gonna fail.
Exactly.
But similarly with higher education sector, when the vice chancellors and the leadership team say we're supporting technology transfer, the reason should not be third stream income. The reason should be making sure that the university is relevant to society.
Exactly.
And we're contributing to the growth of the economy.
Mm-hmm. And I mean, some of the things, I can't echo that. I'm coming from a tech transfer, but I mean, some of the things also that you mentioned, which I think perhaps maybe universities could actually play a role in building entrepreneurial capacity, that mindset, amongst the students, what can we do there as higher education institutions around that?
So, I mean, one of the things for me is competitions. I find, competition, people compete. And when people compete, actually bring out their creativity.
Yes.
So, how do we, first of all, drive more registrations into the technology and innovation, based curricula, the things that are going to drive the next economies, and less so from the humanities are important. But I think we need the right balance. And so we need to then get enough students involved. The projects that we give to students, they mustn't be abstract. Mm-hmm. The projects must be actually dealing with problems in society, so that we start to innovate, start to create. And so for me, I think that's really the role of the university. So when someone comes out of a university at fourth year, they can hopefully be entrepreneurial enough to actually have found a problem with solving a problem that could be the basis of a business. Even if the first business does not scale, hopefully they've learned enough that the second business is going to scale.
In a sense, just to echo what one of the VCs from Germany, Belgium said, that universities now must become the new sort of watchtowers, from ivory tower to watchtower, to take us to the next sort of growth trajectory. And of course, one of the things that I'm really passionate about in terms of this innovation, because building this innovation ecosystem is around developing the people, because it's actually people's actions that actually result, in all of this. No, but I've got more questions, but I think let me allow an opportunity, for questions. Shall we go to the? Okay, shall we? Is there a drum roll? Shall we say?
I thought she was gonna.
Prof. Mayor, do you have Prof. Mayor has a question? Oh. Yes.
I don't know what you expect. You know what? The question that I wanted to ask, but I'm just worried about the time. Me and time. Let me just do what I wanted to ask to Dr. Sibanda. Although you've taken us through all what we should be doing, based on the stories that you've shared, and highlighted how we, meaning everybody's been involved in your system, has failed and succeeded, and the examples that you've given, taking cognizant of how you started when you reflected of the importance of the macro affecting and impacting the micro wherever we are. What do we do differently, just in a few words? What do we do differently in the context of, it seems like things are falling apart. Wherever you go, you don't even leave your house, which at least my one is leaking. But you realize that everything seems to be falling apart. What do we do differently, and do differently immediately, personally, to contribute to this bigger good?
Yeah, so I mean, it's a very important and difficult question. And I think the part of the response is what I said earlier. No one is coming to save us. No one. So I think, as things are falling, off, breaking down and so forth, we need to just be part of the solution. I go to X, there's a lot of negative stuff there. So I think each and every one of us has got to say, how can I contribute? If you've got a child, my view is that you've got to actually then be saying, does my child know enough about entrepreneurship? Do they know enough about innovation? Do they know enough about problem solving? What can I do, personally, in my own space? Yes, you're employed at UNISA, but within your own area at UNISA, how do you then start? What are the bottlenecks that you're facing within your own area of work, and how can you become more efficient? So I think it's really, starting to build one at a time. I mean, the story is told of Rwanda being like the cleanest African city. It was never that way. But, it started with a president that said, you're not going to be throwing things around and saying, well, once a week or once a month, everybody's going to go and pick up something. So I think that within our own areas, within our own lives, is to really start to be more innovative, be more problem solving. If we've got children or nieces or what have you, how do we encourage them to actually move into the STEM area? They call it STEAM. I was in Lesotho, they say the A is for the arts, because the arts are quite important in terms of the creativity component of it. So I don't have an answer, but I think these are my reflections of what I think is a very important question.
Let me get to what the madam wants me to do, which is I've got to put my hand in here. I hope this was a cookie jar.
And then you read the name at the end of the question. There's a name, maybe to check if the person is inside.
Okay. So there's meant to be a name at the end. This is Tsepiso Gwaba. Is Tsepiso him or her online or in the room? So we're going to read the question in any case. The fact that they've contributed to this, we appreciate that. Your book, Nuts and Bolts, this is a question to you, Dr. Sibanda, shares many anecdotes about innovation and entrepreneurship. Can you tell us about a story that stands out to you briefly?
Yeah. So I mean, there's many stories, and I think, like I say, every day was quite different. Every person that I came across was quite, special. But there's perhaps two that I'd like to point out to. There's there's a story of a young man that visited the hub with her mother, and this used to have something called Maxim Mondays. In fact, he tells his story. It's actually in the book because I asked him to make just a couple of paragraphs. And he comes to the hub with his mother. He was still at school. Gets inspired, and long story short, he grows up. He's now in the tech space. And so when I talk about creating the right kind of environments where the dots can connect, it's in a Monday morning where people come and grab a coffee and there's a speaker and this young man, is there with the mother, and that whole environment just changed his own trajectory in terms of, where he is today. The other one is there is an organization that is called Geek Culture. You can Google them, like Geek Culture. So Tiani and his partner, Misho, I see these guys, they're just roaming around the hub. And Tiani actually tells a story. He comes to my office and we, have a chat. And all they wanted to do is get innovation to young people. Today, geek culture, the impact that geek culture has had is just incredible. And I mean, he comes in there, and he expected basically, someone to talk down on him. But we had an engaging conversation, and he talks about the story there. But when I reflect, and in essence, for me, it's one of the scenes of saying that each and every one of us, someone is watching us. Each and every one of us, we are a mentor to someone. We're an example to someone. And when we get an opportunity to be in an influential position, we need to take that seriously and understand that it's not for us. It starts with us understanding that we've been entrusted with a responsibility. And every encounter that we get, we need to treat it very seriously and be present, because we don't know what the impact of being present, actually present, engaging with that individual is going to do, not only to them, but to a broader society. And so when I reflect on geek culture and what they're actually doing now, they're actually on campuses, they are influencing youth, black youth, people that often have been disenfranchised. They've just had an impact. So if I had to pick up stories over and above all the other stories, I mean the book is about stories. Those would be the two that I would offer.
Thank you. Wow. It's actually very encouraging that it's all about people at the end of the day, which is what I understood earlier on. It's in us, starts with us. I like that reference. And then the next one is, she actually had more than one. So no, I can't. It's her again, or him again. Now this one is from Nonhlanhla Mulema. I'm not quite sure if she's in the room or online. You successfully led the transformation of the Innovation Hub. What was the biggest resistance you faced during this turnaround, and how did you overcome it? Tough questions.
Yeah, so I think the biggest challenge was about people. And I mean, none of us are perfect. And in the book, I admit to my own shortcomings. I came in, I was given a mandate, a mission, and I knew that at the most I had 10 years and no more, at the most. I stayed 7.5 years. And so when I came in, 45 days, I knew who was going to be in the bus. And I knew that some people did not have a place in the bus. Now, I had sleepless nights. And these are the things that made me really sick, because I knew that this is someone's mother, someone's father, someone's child. But also at the same time, you had to be honest with people and say, listen, you're a great person, but not for this bus. So it was actually the difficult, decisions and, people pushing back on those decisions. And I think with hindsight, one learns. So you actually learn that every person that drives through the gate is driving through because they want to do good. And at times you need to, just be patient. You need to, guide people. A lot of mentoring was required, but I didn't have that time at the beginning. So I needed to change this and see the change as quickly as possible. So yeah, we let a few people go. A few decided that, because everyone was on contract. So it made my job somehow easier. But it was the most difficult thing that I've had to do. But we did it. I think with the right level of dignity, and I think the pushback, was really changing. Remember, I came in as an outsider. There were people that had been in the system for long, and somehow people wanted to get stuck in this is how we've always done things. But then I had to remind myself that you are accountable. Does this align with the vision that you have for this institution? Yeah.
Wow, impressive. Is this the last one? I think this is the last one. Let me face my. This is from Nokolo Ekwabe. She says, how can academic institutions balance the need for publication with the need for commercialization of research activities, outcomes, without compromising either of these goals?
Yeah, so great question. So within the academic environment is that publications are the basis for promotion. If you don't publish, you perish. I think that's in essence the way that academics actually look at it. But I think over the years, what we have found, and I deal with it in Footprints, by the way, is that when we're working with researchers at UCT, and they tell their story, in one of the reports that we did, is that, remember, if you're going to commercialize something, particularly something that is patentable, it's important to patent it. So the first step is to run to the technology transfer office and say, I have an idea, and I think this idea has got merit, it's got commercial potential. Is this patentable? And if Ayanda and his team say, yes, it is patentable, they will then quickly mobilize and do whatever it is to file a patent application. Once they've filed a patent application, you can then proceed to publish. But if you publish before they've filed a patent application, the commercialization is compromised. And, the UCT researchers found that at the beginning, when they were learning to protect their ideas, their publication rate was low, but not for long. But once they mastered it, they found that their publication rate was higher, because patenting is one form of disseminating the results, the research results. And through that particular process, when they're sitting with the patent attorneys, they actually found that there were things that were worth publishing. They could get maybe 2 papers out of what potentially initially was one, publication. So I think, so that is one part of the advice. The other part of the advice is also, I refer to it, is that you don't have to be the one commercializing everything. It's your idea. Work with the technology transfer office, build a team. If you've got people outside, introduce them to the technology transfer office. It might be a basis of a startup. You remain in the academia, but the ideas are there. I mean, there's great examples. I think in Footprints, I deal with Professor Dennis Liotta, an incredible inventor that's still a researcher at Emory University. He's inventor of Imtrivia and many other drugs. In fact, they invented, I think, the COVID pill, as well. He's still a researcher, but, he's got a lot of stuff that is actually out there in the marketplace. So you can, do both. And at times, the second part of it, commercializing, you're just part of the process, but you're not the one that's leading it.
Yes. Round of applause. Thank you so much.
Check if there's no body that
Yes, that's where we're going. Do we have any questions in the audience? Oh.
Thank you to the organizing committee as well as Dr. Sibanda. Mine is not actually a question, but rather a request that you reflect on something. So in a great deal of your talk was centered around innovation and whatnot. You hinted on funding, and I'd want you to reflect on the current funding model of innovation in the country, with a zoom in on how then do we leverage legislation to ensure that we create a feasible funding model. You can reflect on Section 12J of the Income Tax Act, which I think up until 2021 allowed individuals to invest a minimum of 100,000 rands on a approved Section 12J company, with the principal amount being fully refundable. So that was a missed opportunity because it was poorly socialized, and only the rich really benefited from that. So we had a lot of pensioners who were leaving, who could have put their money into good use, got tax rebates for that, but that was never advice that was available to the layman. The other one is a reflection on the old Section 12 of the Section 12 of the Old Companies Act, which created special industrial zones in the former Bantustans, where companies that established companies there got some form of incentive from the government. Either it could be tax rebate or specialized funding as a strategy for the apartheid government. It worked well because it was a strategy of keeping the black people outside of what they deemed white zones. But for us, this is a missed opportunity. When it was revoked in the early 2000s, we created rust belts in these areas. And I think a reflection on how then can we revisit similar thing. I know they were replaced by special economic zones, but they don't work the same. So yeah, And then lastly, well, I did touch on this, is on the leveraging law. You spoke about, I think, it's Mtutugo. It's a great idea, but then here comes in FSCA. That on its own now places a great cloud over something that is very noble, that is very much needed, but one arm of government says, hey, we don't know you, and we are now investigating you. Now, to prospect investors, it raises red flags and could have, I'm sure the reputational damage is great. And when quantified, we might be reading of, it's an assassination of a noble concept. So if you could just reflect on that. Thank you.
Yeah, so let me start backwards. I think the one is really, I think, let me put it as a regulatory hurdles. And I think, and again, if we go back to the conversation that we're having, is that there needs to be an integration at the highest level, where all the different ministries account to, whether it's a DG in the presidency or is the president himself actually chairing, once a year or what have you. But I think it's really to look at, are there bottlenecks, and regulatory, bottlenecks have been an issue. Even the Joule, there was a regulatory issue because at the time of the Joule, the electric car that was produced with funding from the Innovation Fund, the Department of Science and Technology, and IDC, there was no regulations as to electric vehicles in our roads. And so that became like an issue up until, it could be solved. So you're right. So I think it's important, and this is where incubators can play a role, because at the time that they see these things, they can then be able to identify that this is a barrier, and then start to deal with the barrier with the right kind of ministries or the right kind of bodies before the innovators go, too far. So it's, Tutuga is one, financial services, there's others, there's a whole cannabis industry that is booming, but it's actually facing regulatory, hurdles. What can we do? And we can't be taking forever, to deal with the regulations. We need to be quite firm and more forward looking in terms of that. And I think the innovative funding ways, of course, I think there's actually, we can do better than the way that we're actually doing it. I think the tax incentives tend to work better for those that are already generating money. So, if I take, for example, R&D tax incentive, great if you're actually generating money, but if you're not generating money, it doesn't work. The VC tax incentive that you spoke about, you're correct, great, but it only worked well for the people that had deep pockets. So yesterday I was reflecting with another group that's where we engage on entrepreneurship, and they were saying BEE is not working. Take Starlink, 30%. Who exactly is going to be the beneficiary of that 30%? Maybe someone already that's well established that doesn't need the money. So maybe what we need to be thinking about is some of these BEE deals, the transaction, you actually put up a levy on them, 3%, 5%, or whatever it is, and that then goes into a pot or the fund that Minister Parkstow is actually talking about. And maybe, strategically, the township economy revitalization, where you're actually specifically funding businesses in the townships. So I think we need to think creatively. The SEZs are going to take a while, to get off, because the real benefit of being in an SEZ is if you're going to be exporting. But if you're actually, doing business, locally and you're not exporting, it doesn't really benefit one. So, so I'm hoping that, this dialogue that the president has got coming up we'll hopefully discuss, some of these, issues that, you're talking about, because, the agencies that have been set up, they're not doing justice to it. The need is actually quite huge. So I think we've got to think outside of the box. People have spoken about crowdfunding, for example. But again, I think you then run into a regulatory issue. And also, you need to understand that if you're going to do crowdfunding, you have to sensitize people. They must be more patient, so that they're not expecting the money to just come back as if mashonisa or a stock fail. It actually has to be, slightly, longer, medium to longer term. Yeah. So I'm not sure whether, I hope the reflections, spark more thoughts, and maybe we can continue the conversation, offline or on LinkedIn and in other forums as well. Yeah.
Can I just add, perhaps another complexity? I mean, you can see quite a number of legislations and regulations that are actually, blocking innovations. Last week we had a chat. Noah was there. We last week at the event that is organized by the city of Tshwane as part of the G20. There was a conversation around how FMMA is actually preventing public procurement of innovations. And it's a serious issue, because now when we talk about sort of policy sort of harmonization to make sure that when we talk about innovation, that those innovations are able to find expression in society, and of course it's going to be part of the procurement process. So interestingly, in those conversations, the issue was around how this legislation is preventing these kind of things, right? And one of the things that I mentioned was the fact that actually there was a report that was produced by OECD, right? Looking at exactly the same thing, public procurement, sort of innovation. That suggests that in most of the OECD countries, more than 50% already of countries have got the regulations already in place to actually ensure that these innovations, find expression, right? And I think for our side, when you look at those possibilities, it's also to look at what's happening in other spaces and how do we bring those learnings into our own space to actually change these kinds of regulations and legislation that enable us to be able to actually, solve these bottlenecks that are in the system. And I think it's all up to us as well. I mean, to really put forward aggressively these kinds of suggestions. There's a Startup Act, right? There's a Startup Act, that is, people are conversing and discussing about. And of course, it's very important for us to really engage so that we can put these kind of suggestions, forward. But it's quite exciting times, I tell you.
Oh, thank you very much, colleagues. Yeah, it's David Mubuka, sabbatical NISA HSRC resident, research. So I would like to ask, have we realized also what went wrong with the country? They used to build those helicopters, Rafales and whatever. But China now is building those flying cars. So do we have a strategy also as a country to revitalize those dead industries? Or, like for instance, we saw, the United Friends from the Oval Office already auctioning for the Starlink deals, Naledi High. Like now, for instance, the approval for Starlink to operate in the country, to enroll internet in rural areas, in the schools. So are we cautious enough also to give these students the tools of mass destruction, or to give them the education, innovation in the primary schools, or this tool of the internet, they could just use it? And another one was the issue of, I think let me just, be short. Thank you very much.
Yeah, so I think you raised a few issues, and I think let me, perhaps start with the revitalization of, dead industries. I mean, we spoke about PBMR earlier, And I know, I think about a month ago, I had Minister of Electricity, Ramukupa, talking about, revisiting that. And for me, it's gone, because you're going to have to build up the people. And I think we've heard quite recently, I think some of you might have followed the case of Dinell, and the JV that they were doing, I think with a UAE based company, and went belly up. But if you look at the resources, all the Dinell people are now sitting at UAE. So I think as a country, one of the things really for me is we need to really take long-term thinking, and we need to think about the consequences of our decisions. And that leads me to the second part of your question, because and we can debate this. I mean, Starlink, rural schools are going to be connected, but who's going to pay for that? It's not Starlink is doing it for free. So I think we need to have robust conversations where we really unpack it. And its whole thing is, do you want to be everything to everyone? And is there a way that we can achieve the same without selling our souls? So it's really, I think, tough conversations. And I think, part of the reason why East Africa and West Africa are going to surpass South Africa is because we actually have, I think we're a complex country. I think it's I wouldn't want to be the president of this country, because I think just it's almost like herding cats. That's really what it is, because you're trying to go that way, but there's different, interests. And somehow, we have to have hard, honest conversations as a people. And for me, I'm hoping this dialogue would not be just a talk shop, and we're going to have the hard, conversations for, for the people that are there physically that have been invited, and hopefully some of us can join, online. So going back, nobody's going to save us. We have to, be the ones that actually initiate these things. And I think in our communities, going back to what the vice principal was actually saying, is that if we've got the means, to set up, a coding school for kids in the township, in our own township, let's do that. Even if it's taking 2 rooms or whatever, let's do that, because we don't know what's going to happen to those kids, right? So we start wherever we are with whatever we have, and hopefully we can have a greater impact. Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, a round of applause. Thank you so much, Dr. Sibanda. I am very, okay. Thank you. I'm very mindful of the fact that there are so many questions in person. Also, I know there's a lot of questions that we have online, but we unfortunately have run out of time. We're actually running over time by 20 minutes. Yes, Mr. Noma?
There's a lot of questions. And I'm thinking that perhaps maybe we should have around 2. I don't know. I'm not looking at Dr. Sibanda. I'm looking away. I think we should have around 2, and perhaps maybe, a different structured conversation, around some of these aspects, because there's a lot of, wisdom, that we could share, based on, sort of the experience that we've had in actually building components of this innovation system, and also your experience and expertise in leading all these international organizations, as well as linkages that we've had. There's quite a lot, and I think that it's very relevant now that we're having a national dialogue, so that at least creates sort of
conversations that actually lead us to solutions and possible solutions that people could pursue and put forward. So I'm suggesting a second bite at this. I don't know.
I agree. I mean, that's a long-term solution to this problem. I think the one that a short-term solution that I can suggest is, with your permission, obviously, Dr. Sibanda, I share your email address. And then first I give you the questions and the email addresses of the people who sent them and the names. And then if anyone else has any more questions, you can send him an email and ask him any question that you have, right? I think that's a solution that could work short term, and then long term we'll have a part 2, right? Or also on LinkedIn, connect with Dr. Sibanda on LinkedIn, and then you can inbox him. Thank you so much. I think you can go back to the table, gentlemen. A round of applause for Mr. Ayanda Noma and Dr. Sibanda. And now we are reaching the end of the program. I would like to call up on stage again, Prof. Meyiwa, to come and do our closing for us. A round of applause for Prof, please.
Thank you. This has been very exciting. Colleagues online and in the hall, those that are online, you're missing out. You will be missing out quite soon when we celebrate much more beyond and enjoy our guest speaker as well as keynote addressee. I cannot disagree with the last bit about this when we made reference to this. This is actually the beginning of the dialogue that the president is asking for. And a part of me, even before we got to it, I was thinking, are you part of that? I'm just wondering, that's their loss, which is our loss as a country. But I think the whole idea is that we get to be, as a country, conversing with each other much more. And I like your reference to the far future. That's what we should be looking at, and not just plan for now and for the time that we will even be alive. For times beyond. In that way, even when you think about dropping a cigarette, you'll have to be thinking about your great-great-grandchildren who may not see the kind of grass that we have right now, or the various kinds of grass. So I think we need to be having that kind of culture. But my job here is to try to do a closing remarks, which is very, very hard for me because I was constantly taking notes, everything that I heard from everyone who contributed, I liked so much, and it's very hard for me to look at how do I do that. But I'm going to do this in less than the time that's given, which is 5 minutes. But as we draw the close of this Enlightening Innovation Leadership, a series lecture, conversation, stories. I love stories. Having been raised by a grandmother who told a number of stories, I really do love stories. I could relate much more to that, because then with stories you have proper human beings that you can be relevant and draw from. Today this has been a testament, ladies and gentlemen, to the power of innovation and the fact that the pivotal role of each one of us is significant. You don't need to be looking at an organization, an institution. I so much believe in that it starts with me. It starts with what I do or fail to do. It starts with what I am an accomplice of by not reporting what's going wrong, by not being ethical in what I do. So if anything, you are the promoter and marketer of whatever you're not doing or are doing. So I picked that up very first and foremost from what you were making reference to. And I'd like to therefore extend a heartfelt thanks to you. Heartfelt thanks to those that participated in the program, which is everybody, by attending, and also by the insights that you shared through just the questions that were sent through. You could tell that people had actually thought about things through and possibly reflected on their personal journeys to do this. And the eloquence in how you express this, you speak from the heart, from the passion, which very much resonates with I haven't read the footprints, but certainly I have the nuts and bolts. Your reference to the future of Africa is bright indeed, and we cannot thank. I always say this to my teams and my children. I can't thank Donald Trump enough. We needed that. We definitely needed that. And watch this space, we're going to actually be greater because we're now going to be looking at our own resources, our own expertise, and our own knowledge systems, and our own a whole lot number of things that we've done. We've been innovative ever since in our homes, in our villages, in wherever we are. And innovation is not necessarily something that's going to come out as a manner or necessarily with due respect to technology transfers from those kind of areas. But from what you do every day, the fact that you wake up and think, what am I going to wear? You've got to be innovative and look at the weather and think of, on the basis of how the weather's like, I've got to be putting my dress code in this fashion. That's innovation. I don't know. It's for me. But that as it may be, I'd like to thank everybody and in closing, appreciate the fact that what we've learned today, which is a masterclass, I so much agree with you, Ayanda, is a form of what we need to take forward as a university, as individuals, as families, as mentors, as mentees, as leaders, all of us are leaders in various forms. The highlight of the lecture or this conversation was the fireside chat. I really loved it. I like the engagement. I actually could see that we're now applying what we have heard, what we know, what frustrates us. And I want to end by, I like the fact that you were pointing on the change shall come from what makes us uncomfortable. Although you may not have put it in that way, but we need to transform that which we are not happy with. And in that way, we'll be innovators, we'll be able to be entrepreneurs, we'll be able to contribute in various ways in doing so. And as the university sector, we should play a crucial role, as you say, in not just being producers of theories and information, but come up with crucial centers and ecosystems that ensure that universities, I'm actually trying to quote what you're saying, we should be about incubators that link to the industry, to the ideas that are out there. We are, as the university sector, a fertile ground. We should provide the enabling environment. And with all the stories that you shared, they were indicators of how those stories happened because there was an enabling environment and not the blockages that we see on a daily basis. And your reference to the PFMA was also something that we need to be looking at. Bureaucracy is good, but not to the point of crippling the creation that should be there for us to crystallize this to something that is good. With those words, I want to thank everybody online who's participated, the organizers, as well as you who are here and everybody who's made a contribution towards this. And of course, where's my program director? I don't see him. There she is. She's been the star of this lecture and conversation. Thank you so much, Madam. Thank you for that, Maseko.
So much. Thank you so much, ma'am. And we've reached the end of the program. Before we conclude, I would like to thank the Directorate for Innovation, Technology Transfer and Commercialization, and our partner in this series, the Academy of Applied Technology and Innovation. Thank you so much for bringing this series to us. And please do join us for lunch right there at the back. Thank you. Yes, I want to take a picture. I want because anything that you ask about space, I was so I'm gonna put it here. This one.